Hello, it is April 26, 2024, and this is Political Dharma with Alan Zundell. That's me. Last week on my show, I talked about the possibility that the independent presidential candidacy of Robert F. Kennedy Jr. might cause a contingent election in later this year after the presidential election happens and the Electoral College votes. Contingent election, of course, is when no candidate gets a majority in the Electoral College and the decision for who becomes president devolves to the House of Representatives. Now, I raised that for a specific reason, and that is to answer the question of, in today's situation, if we tried to project who would win a contingent election, I think it would be the Republican candidate. But I also said that part of my conclusion was that we are still so far from the election, and we don't know how much the new Congress will change from the current Congress, so the result could actually be quite different, that a Democrat could actually win. Now, I want to turn that around today and not just talk about the likelihood of who would win a contingent election if one happened. I want to talk about the possibility for Robert F. Kennedy Jr. to actually win the election as president, both his chances in the Electoral College and his chances in a contingent election as well as beyond that. So that's what I'm going to talk about in a little bit. That will be my thrust. Instead of talking about the likelihood of who would be winning in a contingent election from our vantage point this far ahead of the election, how things could favor a possible win by Robert F. Kennedy Jr. And I think that possibility of someone who's not a major party candidate winning the election is much higher, even if not real high. It's much higher today than it's been in, say, 100 years or more. So, should be interesting, I hope. First of all, though, we want to go, as usual, to some of the updates on ballot access, as well as what else is happening with Robert F. Kennedy Jr., the most prominent of the candidates for the president who are not one of the major party candidates. So first off, let's look at an announcement from the Kennedy campaign in which I'm not sure who released this, said that they were going to make, Kennedy's going to make a major announcement to the press in New York City this coming Wednesday, May 1st, at 1 p.m. Eastern Time, which would be 10 a.m. Pacific Time here where I am, and it's going to be live streamed on the Kennedy Campaign YouTube channel. I don't have any clue. They didn't say much about what this major announcement is going to be about. My first instinct was to say, oh, maybe they already obtained the signatures they need to be on the ballot in New York State. And then I thought, well, that doesn't seem very likely, because to get on the ballot in New York State, you need 45,000 signatures, which is high, very high compared to most of the rest of the states. And also, they just started collecting the signatures a little over a week ago on April 12th, I think. Anyway, it was a Tuesday, about 10 days ago or so. And in that amount of time, I don't think they could get the 45,000 they need, let alone a buffer of many more thousand signatures, because New York is famous for, or I should say infamous, for how stringent they are about validating signatures for other types of candidates. So I don't think it's very feasible. They could be announcing that they got on the ballot. And then I thought, well, what else could it be? Well, Kennedy recently got the nomination of a minor party in Michigan. Maybe he got the nomination of a minor party there in New York. Now, this is just guesswork on my part. And the only two minor parties in New York that have ballot access right now are the Conservative Party, and I think that's to the right of the Republicans, so it doesn't seem like a good fit for Kennedy, and the Working Families Party, which is to the left of the Democrats. Doesn't seem like a good fit either, but I think there's more of a possibility that could be the Working Families Party. They are not too enamored of Joe Biden, as we can see in this X posting from the Working Families Party of New York, saying that they were encouraging Democrats in the primary to leave the space for the Democratic nomination blank in order to show dissatisfaction with Biden's Israel policy. And so maybe they, for that reason, decided they were going to nominate Kennedy instead of Biden, which I think in normal events they eventually would, because mostly they cross-nominate whoever happens to be the Democratic candidate. They usually cross-nominate. But I think more likely the Working Families Party may be endorsing Kennedy. But again, that's not a perfect fit either, because Kennedy is also favoring Israel's actions in the Gaza situation. So I don't know about that. So this is all speculation on my part. I will be watching that major announcement. I hope to be anyway. I'm going to be we're putting our house up for sale this week, so I may have to leave the house to actually, at the time that conference, that live stream is going on. But I will get whatever they have later and take a look at it and report to you about it, or you can watch it yourself. So that was the first one, major announcement in New York. I have no idea what that's all about. In the case of the We the People Party in Hawaii that was being challenged by the Democrats, well, the Kennedy campaign prevailed. The Elections Commission that was hearing the case, Division of Elections, said that the Democratic Party challengers they failed to meet their burden of proof. And the whole argument there was that some of the officers in the We the People Party, this is Kennedy's party in Hawaii, that got enough signatures to get on the ballot and then nominate Kennedy to the ballot. They said that some of the officers of the new We the People Party were Democrats, but they don't have party registration in Hawaii. Anyway, the hearing officer decided against the Democrats. And the interesting thing here was the Kennedy campaign did not actually have a lawyer at that hearing. They had the volunteer chair of the We the People Party of Hawaii as the person making their case, and they needed a little bit of help from the judge to know what to do and how to handle that case. But they did prevail. It might go to an appeals court. That depends upon the Democratic Party challengers, so that case may not be over yet. So far, it looks like they are secure. Kennedy's secure on the ballot in Hawaii, Utah, and probably Michigan. But in other places, it's not as secure. What do we have up next? Speaking of not being secure on the ballot, in the American Values 2024 Super PAC that was gathering signatures for the Kennedy campaign decided it was not going to hand in those signatures because they were being challenged as to whether it was legal for them to gather signatures and thus, in a sense, coordinate with the Kennedy campaign's actions in gathering signatures. AV24 said, well, the Kennedy campaign's doing well enough to get signatures on its own that we don't need to turn in these signatures, which seems to me a pretty lame excuse. Anyway, the Kennedy campaign said it's going to redo 3 of those 4 states that American Values already gathered signatures for, and that is Arizona, South Carolina, and Georgia. So it's creating some extra work for the Kennedy campaign. And in Michigan, American Values did gather signatures there as well, but the Kennedy campaign already got on the ballot as the nominee of a minor party, the Natural Rights Party, which came out of the Transcendental Meditation movement. And I found an interesting couple of tidbits from that situation in the news. I was looking into the Natural Rights Party. Now, I said by mistake, and in this, like most of my broadcast so far, I'm going to have to correct some errors from the previous episode, usually because I misstate something. It comes out of my mouth different than I intended it to come in my brain. Anyway, in this case, I said that the Natural Rights Party in Michigan, that was the only state they had ballot access on. I don't know that's true. I looked into it a little, but I haven't been able to find any other state where they have ballot access. What I intended to say, the next story in the last episode was about Cornel West getting the nomination of the Unity Party of Colorado. And I meant to say it there, that the Unity Party only had ballot access in that one state. But it may be that the Natural Rights Party has only ballot access in Michigan as well. But here's what I found out about some of that. Let me again, switch around, show you the graphic for those of you who are watching this on the video form rather than listening to it in a podcast. All right, that Kennedy, he got a spot on Michigan's ballot. This is from the Detroit News, and digging down into that story a little bit where they said that he got the nomination. He's going to be on the ballot in Michigan as the nominee of the Natural Rights Party. It turns out that they were getting a challenge too. I'm stumbling over my words. There was a challenge from the Democratic Party against the Natural Rights Party's nomination as well. And the person doing this was an elections lawyer and a former chairman of the Michigan Democratic Party. Said he had been hired by a national group called Clear Choice to challenge Kennedy's position on the Michigan ballot. So once again, the Democrats are putting their hand into these successes of the Kennedy campaign and getting on the ballot, trying to hang them up and stall them, get them off the ballot, give them trouble, or they're going to have to address it. Another article about the same situation was in the New York Times. Now, this is interesting to me anyway. It turns out that it took only 2 votes in the Natural Rights Party to nominate Kennedy to get him on the ballot there in Michigan. What happened is that the chair of the party, he called a convention, a state convention, by having the secretary of the party show up at his law office. They gavelled the meeting into order. They nominated Kennedy for their presidential candidate, and then they, ended the state convention with just the 2 of them present and voting. So I wonder if that's what the Democrats are unhappy about, but who knows? That means that if we take off those 3 states that the American Values gathered signatures for but aren't going to turn in, it brings Kennedy's total number of states where he has enough signatures to get on the ballot, even though it's not yet certified in all those states, to 9. And I said last week, I think it was 12, so 12 minus 3 is 9. He's still got a ways to go. If you look at this, Cornel West still only has 5, but Green Party and Libertarian Party have many more. And I added the Constitution Party down there at the bottom of my chart because they have 13 states in which they have ballot access, and in a couple of days the Constitution Party is going to be nominating its presidential candidate. Here we have ballot access news stories saying that 2 days from when, April 25th, I guess that's tomorrow, they're going to be nominating their presidential nominee. Now, as I go forward, I think I'm going to at least by July, I'm going to drop covering any of these parties or candidates other than the top 5 who have that have the most states that they have ballot access in. So I'm thinking 5 or 6. That'll probably be, of course, the Libertarians, the Greens, maybe Kennedy, and not sure who else on there would be in the top ones. But that's because some of these other smaller things, I'll go back to the ballot thing so you can take a look at that once again, see the parties that I had been following. Constitution Party and like the Socialist Workers Party that Claudia de la Cruz is running with, those usually have very small vote totals in the presidential elections, so they hardly make any difference whatsoever. I'm just interested in the parties that may make an impact on the ultimate election. So going forward, that's what I'll be looking at. On the topic of the minor parties, the Libertarian Party, which is going to be holding its national convention at the end of May to choose its presidential nominee, they have invited President Joe Biden and President Donald Trump to address their convention. They've already extended an invitation to Kennedy, who they've been in discussions with, so he could show up there as well. Who knows if they will accept this invitation to both appear before the Libertarians and talk to them. And anything else? Yes, one more story here, which is the story I mentioned last week about Biden may not be able to get on the general election ballot in Ohio and Alabama because the Democratic convention that nominates him will be meeting later than the deadline in those states for getting a candidate on the ballot. there was an email from the Kennedy campaign including Texas among those states in which Biden may not be able to get on the ballot. If you saw that, I haven't been able to verify that. I've been looking into it online and have not found any indication that there will be a problem for Biden getting on the ballot in Texas. So I'm not sure where this information came from. If it were true, I mean, that would be great for the Kennedy campaign, because any states in which Biden's not going to be on the ballot, Kennedy has a very good chance of actually winning that state. So say Biden didn't appear on the ballot in Texas, it was just Kennedy and Trump as the front runners, assuming that Kennedy is going to get that far, which I think he has a good chance of doing. Then Kennedy would pick up probably the whole anti-Trump vote of the Democrats, as well as the people that are attracted to Kennedy more than Biden. So might easily beat Donald Trump in a red state, or Ohio or Alabama for that matter. So that could be a way that Kennedy picks up some electoral college votes if they refuse to put Biden on the ballot. All right, so let's turn from that ballot access news. And I actually forgot to time myself, so I don't know exactly how long I've been going on, probably quite a while. I'm going to turn now to the prospects of Kennedy winning in the upcoming presidential election. Now, last week, as I said, I looked at how likely it was that Trump would win in a contingent election, and I decided that if we had the current composition of Congress, it seems likely, but it would be very close, so hard to tell. It could easily swing in the Democrats' direction. Today, I'm going to take it from the opposite side, not what's likely to happen, but what could happen. The possibility that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. could actually win this election. So I'm going to go over the process one more time in simple terms of the Electoral College vote and et cetera, not only to, in some small instances, correct myself for things I got a little inaccurate last week, but also to answer questions. When I talked about the contingent election in my last episode, I had a lot of comments and a lot of questions about this whole process of the presidential election if it doesn't go through the usual where someone gets a majority in the Electoral College. So first up, of course, is to know that the presidential election is not determined by the popular vote, meaning how many votes each candidate got in the general election or the percentage of votes that each candidate got. You can have the most popular votes but still lose in the Electoral College and therefore not become president. That's what happened in 2016. Trump won in the Electoral College. Hillary won the popular vote, so she actually had more votes across the country than Trump. But translating the votes through the Electoral College, each state gets a number of electoral votes. And we see here a map, if you're watching again. This is from the website 270 to Win. Each state has a certain number of electoral votes that's based on its how many senators and representatives it has in the U.S. Congress. So you got a high of 54 in California, 2 senators plus 52 representatives, to a low of, say, Wyoming, a very low population state. I think it has the lowest population in the country. They have 3 electoral votes. And in almost every state, all of the states' electoral votes are going to be given to the candidate who has the most votes in that state. Not the most votes across the country, but the most votes in that particular state. There's only 3 states that are exceptions to that rule, and that's, first of all, Maine and Nebraska, in which they split up their electoral votes. In Nebraska, if you're looking at this, they have 5 electoral votes. The candidate, the presidential candidate who gets the most votes across the state gets 3 electoral votes. And then in each congressional district, whichever candidate got the most votes in that particular congressional district gets 1 electoral vote. So if you see the different colors there, that means that there were 3 votes that went to the Republican, and then 1 of the congressional districts that went to the Republican, but 1 of the Electoral College votes in 1 congressional district went to the Democrat. And in Maine, it's the reverse situation. You had 2 votes from the statewide results of the election going to the Democrat, Joe Biden. This is in 2020. And 1 congressional district voting Democratic and one congressional district voting Republican. So they split up their votes according to congressional districts, some going to by congressional district, some going by the statewide vote. The other exception is, once again, Maine and Alaska. So Maine double counts here, but Alaska is somewhat different. They have ranked choice voting, and somebody asked me last week in response to my brief discussion of ranked choice voting in the presidential election. They said they had no clue what it was. So this is a mock-up from a state of Alaska about ranked choice voting, and as you can see, when you get your ballot, it lists the candidates, but then on the right side of the ballot, instead of picking only one candidate, you get to rank the candidates. You can say, for example, that I prefer Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is my first choice, Joe Biden is my second choice, Donald Trump is my third choice, and so forth and so on, as many candidates as they have room for on their ballot, and I'm not sure how they're going to cut that off in all their other, in Alaska at least, all their other elections, they cut it off at 4 candidates. But in the presidential election, it's different. I'm not sure how. I'll look into the details of this if and when Kennedy gets ballot access in Alaska and Maine, and I'll talk a little further about ranked choice voting. And when he gets on the ballot in Nebraska and Maine, I'll talk more about the split vote thing and how that might implicate the election. So ranked choice voting. Okay, so each voter is going to rank the candidates, and then they count the first choice votes. And if a candidate gets the majority of votes, that is 50% plus one vote or more, that candidate wins the election right then. But if no candidate gets a majority of first choice votes, then they eliminate the candidate who got the fewest first choice votes and redistribute that candidate's, the voters' ballots who voted for that candidate first choice to their second choice. So, hypothetical example here, when we have only Biden, Kennedy, and Trump on the ballot, and they've counted the first choice votes, Biden, let's say hypothetically, got 40% of the votes, Kennedy got 30% of the vote, and Trump got 25% of the vote. Now, because none of them got 50% plus votes, there's no winner. So what they have to do is take the candidate with the fewest first choice votes, which in this example is Donald Trump, and they eliminate Trump, and all of the ballots that had Trump as the first choice are redistributed to those voters' second choice. And my point last week was that if you that the Trump voters are more likely to have Kennedy as their second choice than Biden as their second choice. So if we assume most of those ballots are redistributed to Kennedy, Kennedy would then most likely pass the majority threshold and be the winner. So even though he was second place in terms of first choice votes, in the final round of counting, he could become the winner. Now, if Biden got fewer votes, the fewest first choice votes and was eliminated, same thing would probably happen. Those voters would probably Biden voters would probably prefer Kennedy to Trump as their second choice. So I'm saying that in the 2 states that have ranked choice voting, Kennedy, if he is able to split the vote enough that nobody gets a majority in the first round, he may well win in that particular election. So where am I at? All right, so we're talking about the Electoral College, going on a lot longer than I intended to. And to win in the Electoral College, once all these states have added up their electoral votes, to win you have to have a majority of the votes. And that's what usually happens in a presidential election. And that's why that's the main reason, the Electoral College majority requirement, that we have a 2-party system. In any office where you have only one person winning, it's likely that the opponents of the leading candidate are going to combine forces to try to have more than that candidate. So you end up with 2 coalitions, because if you split into more than 2, somebody's going to win with less than a majority, and all the losers are going to see that they lost a chance to combine forces. Anyway, The Electoral College, because it has this majority requirement and only one person can win, is the main reason we have a two-party system. It's hard to overcome that defect. And how likely is it that Kennedy could get a majority in the Electoral College? I think there's a higher possibility than usual. That doesn't mean I think it's likely. I'm going to be honest with you. I still think it's unlikely. But as we approach the election, conditions can change to the point where it becomes more and more likely, because even at this point, it seems more possible for Kennedy to win the election than for any other non-major party candidate in over 100 years, in my estimation at least. So what he would need is the most Electoral College votes, which means he would have to get the most votes in enough states to add up to a majority in the Electoral College, not just the most Electoral College votes, but the majority of Electoral College votes. And the conditions right now that favor Kennedy's possibility there are that voting by party on the part of voters is becoming more and more attenuated. That is, voters are less and less likely to vote by party. And there's a large segment of voters have been switching back and forth between the Democrats and the Republicans from one presidential election to another. So party loyalty isn't as strong as it was in the fairly recent past. That means there's a lot of voters that could be split off from their usual habit of party voting. When we think about what's likely to happen, we usually think in terms of what happens in previous elections. And in previous elections, party loyalties were much higher. So that voter custom or that traditional voter behavior may be different with Kennedy on the ballot. So that's one thing that favors Kennedy. Another thing is that there's a lot of voter dissatisfaction with both parties, so that's why they're not voting that way, and voter dissatisfaction with conditions in the country in general, with the economy, with our role in the world, with a variety of things. There's just a lot of dissatisfaction and a looking for somebody different to take us in a different direction. There's the two major party candidates, very disliked, both Trump and Biden, very low favorability ratings, more so than previous candidates even. Politicians are never very popular. So that's another opening for Kennedy. And finally, the fact that all of this voter dissatisfaction is happening and there's lots of different choices beyond Kennedy. There may be the Libertarian Party, the Green Party, the Cornel West candidacy, Socialist Workers candidate, Constitution, all these things. If more people vote for those other parties and other candidates, then that would have voted for a major party candidate in other times, that's not going to hurt Kennedy. It won't help him. It'd help him if they voted for him rather than any other third-party candidate. But by not voting for Biden or Trump, they reduced the potential vote for the major party candidates, making it easier for Kennedy to pull ahead of them. So all of these factors make the field of operation around Kennedy more favorable to him. And from the standpoint of what's happening with the Kennedy campaign, I think there's a lot of things that favor him over other types of non-major party candidates as well. For one thing, he is going for, I wouldn't really say the center, but he's taking votes, I hate that phrase. He is attracting people both from the Republican side and from the Democratic side of the ideological spectrum, if you want to call it that, or from the voter-leaning tendencies. He's taking from both sides, which means that he's not simply going to split the vote on one side or the other, but he can go through the middle like that. And it's not so much that he's taking centrist positions as he's taking populist positions. He's taking some positions that are have a lot of resonance for voters. He's against elite control. The corporate control of the government is one of his big things. And the more he gets that message out, the more voters take a look at him. They're going to find that very appealing, I think. So his populist message that attracts voters from across the spectrum is something else that's in his favor. Of course, the Kennedy name favors him because it's already well known, and there's a lot of affection toward it, or a lot of positive feelings toward it still. He's got money at his disposal. His vice presidential pick just put in $2 million into the campaign. So he has much better funding than other non-major party candidates. And I think in general, he's doing a good job. Some of the voters who are most likely to vote for a Kennedy campaign are those who are most favorable to Kennedy. Let's put that another way. Voters who are least likely to vote for a major party candidate, such as young people and independents, are disproportionately attracted to the Kennedy campaign. So rather than sitting out the election because they don't like either of the major party candidates, they may well decide to get out and vote in higher numbers than usual. Independents and young people, because they like Kennedy and they have that option on the ballot, may be more likely to get out and vote. So I think that's the main things. Of course, what Kennedy needs to do from this point on is, number one, he has to continue to get ballot access in various states. This will keep his name in the news and make it possible for him to actually become a competitive candidate in the general election. The more he comes close to that goal, the more media coverage he gets, the more voters are going to hear about him, look into him, see him as a serious possibility. Because what you have to do is you have to change the belief that voters have that only by voting for a major party candidate will their vote make a difference. Now, the more it becomes credible to them that a vote for Kennedy could make a difference, the more likely they are going to be to vote that way. So the important thing is to reinforce the belief that a Kennedy campaign can be competitive with the major parties, which means getting higher results in public opinion polls, getting on the ballot in more and more states. And as long as the Kennedy campaign can keep moving in those directions, he has a better chance of being taken seriously. This idea of belief of voters also makes it challenging for someone like me to talk about this, because when I say it looks, it's not real likely that Kennedy can win, then people can take that as, oh, I shouldn't bother voting for him. Well, all I'm saying is that, giving what we can see now and assuming that voters act as they have in the past, what is or isn't likely. But what I'm also saying to you is that things are not exactly the way they have been in the past. So the possibility has opened for a different winner in the election. And also that as we move forward, and if Kennedy keeps doing well, the possibility and the likelihood are going to grow over time. Still hard for me to see that it can actually get to the point of a win, but I hope he does, because frankly, I'd rather see a Kennedy win than either Biden or Trump. And you probably guessed that by now. I don't know that I'm in alignment with him on all the issues, but I think that message of we need to stop spending so much money on military actions that are backfiring on us and also in other parts of the world, and also bankrupting the country. And chronic health issues is a big thing that I know is a real problem that other parties aren't addressing. And other things like the two major parties are just not, willing to tax the wealthy as much. They're too much money into the military-industrial complex. They're not addressing the corporate capture of both parties and government in general. These are things that I think Kennedy has been leading with that are all important. So the belief that he can win is an important one, and I'm not going to discount that the possibility is higher than normal. All right, then. So let's take a look at the process beyond the Electoral College, assuming, let's say that's the first time Kennedy can win. If he actually gets a majority of Electoral College votes, if he does a real good job in his campaign and he gets on lots of ballots, all the ballots maybe, gets a high percentage of voters in enough states, he could actually have the majority votes in the Electoral College and win that way. Now, if it doesn't, if he does well enough to get Electoral College votes that keep either Biden or Trump from having a majority, it becomes a contingent election. Before I do that, let me jump back for 1 minute and say that if Kennedy can get into the presidential debates, that will increase his chances exponentially for attracting voters, just like Ross Perot did way back in 1992. Got 90% of the vote, primarily because he was able to talk directly to the general public in the presidential debate. just recently, when was that? 2 days ago? On the Howard Stern show, they did an interview of Joe Biden, who hasn't been doing very many interviews. And Biden said that he would debate Trump, says, I'm happy to do it. Up till now, he has not committed to debating Trump, and this is not an ironclad commitment as well, but it means that there probably will be presidential debates. And the first presidential debate will be held in September with the candidates who will be in the debate chosen by the Presidential Debates Commission in around Labor Day. So by then, if Kennedy meets the criteria, he's already met the criteria of constitutional eligibility, the right age, he's a natural-born citizen, etc. Evidence of ballot access, if he's able to get on the ballot in enough states to hypothetically get a majority of votes, and if he has at least 15% of the voters in a public opinion poll, national public opinion poll, say they are likely to vote for him, then he will be included in the debate, which would help him enormously. So he's already on the road to getting ballot access. He's not yet close to getting in enough states to get a majority, but that's the aim he has going forward. He's already, in some polls, nearing 15%. He's in some polls around 13%, I think has been his high point. So it wouldn't be too hard to build on that going forward. So he may well get into the presidential debate, which means, his chances are going to be improved even more. All right, so as a reminder, of course, November 5th is Election Day. Some states have early voting or mail-in voting, so earlier than November 5th and late in October you may be voting, but the deadline is November 5th. Then those votes are in each state. The state will count them up, see in which congressional districts in a couple of cases, or in ranked choice voting in a couple of cases. But in general, which candidate got the most votes in that state, and then the electors for the candidate who got the most votes will be chosen. And the governors in the state have to certify the electors from that state by December 11th. That means, they choose which candidates' electors are going to be officially certified by the state to be able to vote. A few days later, about a week later, on December 17th, the electors in each state gather at their state capital and cast their votes for president and vice president. And then those votes are, gathered up, and they send a copy to the certified copy to the National Archives and one to the U.S. Congress. In January 3rd, the new Congress, that is those who have been elected in the upcoming election to the Senate or to the House, convene at noon to start the new Congress. And 3 days later, Congress meets in joint session under the presiding officer, the vice president, the current vice president, I'm pretty sure, and they count the electoral votes for president and vice president. If there's a majority for one candidate, the candidate wins there, and they're sworn in on January 20th. Now let's go back to the idea of a contingent election. Is that likely to happen? Well, in 2020, the last presidential election, I have a map up here, and you can see that Biden won with 306 electoral college votes to Trump's 232. In that election, there was a difference of 74 votes, which is roughly, you can see on this map, there are certain states that went blue for the Democrat Biden, but they have kind of a crosshatch pattern. That means that they flipped from Trump in 2016 to the Democrat in 2020. Those are mostly what are called the swing states, and as we saw last week, if you add up the swing states, it's roughly 77 votes. So if Kennedy could win in these swing states, which are the easiest for him to win because each of the major party candidates is likely to have fairly equal amounts of votes instead of one or the other being way ahead, so that Kennedy can more easily catch up and get more votes than either of the major party candidates. If he can get those, he could get that 77 votes. If we had the same split between Biden and Trump as last time, he could throw the the race into a contingent election. So nobody would have a majority if Kennedy took those states and deprived either Trump or Biden from getting a majority. Now, that's 2020. It wasn't real close, but in recent memory, just 24 years ago, George W. Bush got 271 electoral college votes. That's just one more than necessary. But if two of those votes had gone to Gore instead of Bush, Gore would have won the election. So a difference of only 2 electoral college votes. And if you see there, it says other, 1 electoral college vote was not cast for either of the candidates. This is called a faithless elector. They're chosen to vote for a particular candidate, then for some reason they don't vote for that candidate. They might vote for some other candidate instead. And that's a possibility. That also might happen is that some Biden or Trump elector decides to throw his vote to Kennedy instead in the official electoral college vote. Anyway, it is possible to get such a close electoral college vote that it wouldn't take much to throw it into the contingent election. And as far as getting electoral college votes, we have to go back to 1968, which seems like a long time ago to many of you, I'm sure, but it's within my lifetime. I was 16 years old. And George Wallace was a third-party candidate who got a number of electoral college votes. Let's see. The Republican, Richard Nixon, got 301 electoral college votes, which was more than a majority. And Hubert Humphrey, the Democratic candidate, got 191. And George Wallace got 46 electoral college votes. Now, he didn't deprive Nixon of a majority because he really took most of his votes from people who would have ordinarily voted for the Democrat, Hubert Humphrey. But because Wallace was upset about the signing of civil rights acts by President Lyndon Johnson, who Humphrey was the vice president under, he took away a lot of the southern states from that would usually have voted Democratic. So that it's within my lifetime that a candidate got a fairly good number of electoral college votes. So you combine that, it is possible for another candidate to get electoral college votes with the possibility of having a very close electoral college vote as there was in 2000. And we could easily see a contingent election this year. Now, the Senate picks the vice president out of the top 2 electoral college vote getters. We don't know who those would be. And it's 1 senator, 1 vote. So, say, for example, Nicole Shanahan was one of the top 2. She could even have come in second in the electoral college vote if Kennedy Shanahan is able to get a lot of those electoral college votes, win several states. If she came in second, she could very well win the vice presidency because if Shanahan is one of the top two, she's probably going to get votes from the party that wasn't part of the top 2 and could win that way. I have more to say about that in a minute, about the Senate vote. And in the House, each congressional delegation in a state gets 1 vote. So it's a 1 vote per state, not 1 vote for each member of the House. Now that means that states big like California get 1 vote. They have a real high population and a number of people in the House. States like Wyoming that have a tiny population and only 1 member of the House, they get 1 vote as well. So it's not a very representative system, but that's what's in the Constitution. That's what's in the 12th Amendment to the Constitution, which was trying to fix an earlier problem with the Electoral College that was actually in the original Constitution. So people have asked how those state delegations would choose who they're going to vote for. Now, there's no rule it has to be unanimous, and ordinarily things are done by a majority vote. But the important thing is that each house, that is the Senate and the House of Representatives, the majority of the whole body gets to choose the rules by which the states would get to vote. Now, is that clear? So you might have if only each state gets 1 vote and it was up to them, the majority in enough states might choose the Republican. But if the majority of the people in the House of Representatives were Democrats, they might say, well, the states have to have a unanimous vote or it doesn't count. or they have to have a supermajority, not just a majority, or it doesn't count. So they could thwart the other party from actually winning a contingent election if they set rules that were not favorable to that party. And in the Senate, likewise, they could stage a filibuster to try to block a vote that otherwise would go to one party or the other. So the rules are chosen by the majority party in each house, and then they vote, and and then the states vote, and then you determine you have to have a majority of the states to win. So there could be a stalemate there as well if enough states either are tied, or the rule is you have to have a supermajority and they can't get one. There might not be a majority of states, so you could have a stalemate. Getting pretty complicated, right? So in a contingent election, now Congress can also pass a law if there's a stalemate, deciding to choose a particular candidate. So if they can cause a stalemate and the majority in the House decides, okay, we got a majority in the House, maybe the same party has a majority in the Senate, let's pass a law saying we pick this candidate, or they can choose the manner in which a candidate will be chosen. So that's another way that it could happen. And then finally, if no candidate, and it's the top three in the House, top three candidates from the Electoral College votes. So that means if Kennedy gets some Electoral College votes, he's going to be in that choice. And he could have a chance of winning in the case of trying to break a tie. That's what he's counting on if there's a contingent election. That if the Democrats and Republicans end up in some kind of stalemate, trying to vote state by state, that Kennedy could be a consensus candidate. And where I said last week how voters could pressure their Congress members to vote for Kennedy would be to say, look, Kennedy won the electoral vote in our state, and now there's a stalemate in this contingent election. We want you to vote for Kennedy because he was the one we chose anyway. And if we can get enough states to vote for Kennedy, then we've broken this stalemate. So that's the plan for Kennedy. It's a possibility. I don't think it's highly likely, but a lot of this stuff, we've never gone through this process in 100 years and gotten to that point even where a stalemate happened, never. Not since one of the very early elections, I think in 1800. Anyway, been a long time since anything close to this happened. If no president is chosen by Inauguration Day of January 20th, and the Senate chose a vice president, then that vice president-elect becomes the new president and is sworn in. If neither the vice presidential candidate is chosen, or a president is chosen in the contingent election, and we get to the Inauguration Day of January 20th, and Congress hasn't chosen anybody, and they haven't chosen a manner of choosing somebody, then it would probably follow the path of the presidential succession, which means passes from president to vice president, then the Speaker of the House, which we don't know who it would be. It might be Republican Mike Johnson again, would become president, and then, of course, it would pass from the Speaker, if something happens to the Speaker, to the Cabinet, to the President pro tem of the Senate. Anyway, let's not even think about that possibility right now. Too complicated. There was one other question I wanted to answer. Oh my gosh, this is getting to be a long one. One other question I wanted to answer, and that's about what happens if a candidate is jailed or dies before this election process is all over. Now, jailed, I'm not sure of that. I didn't really have time to look at it closely. It hasn't happened ever. There was one candidate who was in jail during the election campaign, and that was socialist candidate Eugene Debs in 1920. Didn't hinder him from actually running for president. His campaign handled the campaign. He sat in jail, gave speeches occasionally, and wrote articles. Got 6% of the vote in the popular vote that year. So it's possible to run if you're in jail, but I don't think Trump is going to even come to trial, let alone being convicted before all this process plays out. All the trials on criminal charges against Trump have been delayed for one reason or another, and it doesn't seem like they're going to be resolved before the presidential election is over. So I don't think that's likely to happen. Otherwise, what would happen if he was in jail and they had the Electoral College vote? Well, he could be chosen even though he's in jail, I assume. And what would happen on Inauguration Day if he was still the candidate and the choice, whether contingent election or the Electoral College vote? I imagine they would go to the jail and inaugurate him. Maybe he could be impeached. I don't know. But if the president dies, one last complication here, because they're both up there. Trump's in his high 70s and Biden's in his low 80s, both of them older than me, and I'm already having problems. So what happens is if it is between the end of the primary season and the conventions, then the convention for a party would choose their candidate. So say Biden dies between the end of the primaries and the holding of the Democratic Convention, the Democratic Convention could choose a replacement candidate, and they would, figure out the rules for that. Same thing on the Republican side. Now, if it's after the convention but before the election, then the National Party Committee would choose the replacement candidate. So the Democratic National Committee, if Biden died after the convention before the election, they could choose a replacement candidate. And if it's after the election, but before the Electoral College vote, well, then the Electoral College actually chooses anyway. They can choose who to vote for. Some states would have to pass a law freeing the electors from any kind of binding commitment to a particular candidate if that candidate was dead. So that, for example, again, well, let's use Trump so we're not picking on Biden too much. If Trump did die in that situation, then the Trump electors could vote for a different Republican, especially if their states released them to do that, which you assume they would do, being Republican-leaning states. And then finally, if somebody dies after the Electoral College vote and before the inauguration, well, then that's kind of terra incognita. We don't know. It would be the vice president who would ordinarily take over anytime the president dies. But say this whole messy process of contingent elections and everything else, and if there's no vice president and the president dies, we've never been there before. We just don't know what would happen. So I guess Congress would have to pass a law or something. Well, that's it. That's plenty enough for this week. Sorry to have gone on so long. I hope you got something out of it and it wasn't too repetitive of previous shows. My next few shows, I'm sure, will be much shorter because I won't be going through this again. If you liked it, like, share, subscribe, comments. I'd love to get comments. And if you want to donate to this show, and you can put a comment on the donation saying, here, I'll give you $50 if you shut up sooner, or you're more concise. That's great. Or even $5. I'm easily bribed. So on my website, www.politicaldharma.com, there's a button where you can hit to get to a secure PayPal link and donate something. Thanks to you who have been donating. That's it for this week. Sorry to have gone on so long, but I find this stuff to be interesting. I hope you do too. If you stuck around this long, you must have. Bye. Next week.
With ease, I see the chains are breaking. We gained our focus. The moves we're making will prove to determine our self-worth as a passenger on this vehicle Earth.